my great pleasure to welcome you to the opening day of the 2020 Global Sustainability Film Awards.
It is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the 9th TVE Global Sustainability Film Awards. As many of you know, TVE was founded 36 years ago with a mission to use the power of films to highlight sustainability and environmental issues.
Let's look forward to the 5 days, and I hope you stay with us throughout the 5 days. Every day we have a very exciting program for you.
Hello, I'm called Robert and I'm here congratulating you kids for getting involved in the GSFA Awards. That's films coming in from 35 countries around the world, over 100 applicants this year. That's all you brilliant young people uniting together to solve a global problem, a problem that kind of unites us all, so let's get excited about it.
And in the winning film is Traces by Sébastien Pang.
Et si j'ai appris quelque chose dans cette forêt, c'est bien la force que peut donner la terre à celui qui y consacre sa vie.
Cher organisateur du festival, je tiens à vous remercier pour le prix que vous m'avez attribué. Je ne m'attendais pas à cela et ça me fait vraiment très plaisir. D'autant plus qu'en ce moment, je prépare mon prochain film que j'espère vous présenter l'année prochaine.
Home to the workforce of women who together contribute to reaching our grapes to European shores. Women who stand testimony to the fact that Indian grapes are not just taste-worthy, but clean and fair.
And I'm so happy to welcome the audience, the jury members, and of course the fantastic 14 finalists from across the globe to this first International Daring Debates.
Sustainable businesses are on a roll, gaining a competitive advantage over their conventional counterparts and attracting investment.
Impacts, as illustrated by the Volkswagen diesel scam, which resulted in about 30 billion euros in fines and compensations. Now, if the company
technology and to invest in renewable energy, precisely because there is simply not enough stuff to invest in, and you have a pretty sure bet, like climate change is going to destroy the world.
Welcome to the second day of the 2020 Global Sustainability Film Awards, organized by TVE and Difficult Dialogues. Yesterday, we heard from extraordinary young people from around the world, including filmmakers, activists, and debaters, who give us hope for a better future. Today, we are turning our attention to the world of business and the challenge of changing mindsets in the sectors with the power to drive real change. Since its founding 9 years ago, the Global Sustainability Film Awards has celebrated the role of business in building a more sustainable world and highlighted the importance of film in bringing that story to a broader audience. In a little while, we'll be announcing the winners of two very exciting award categories, Doing Business Differently and AI. And in the first of 4 difficult dialogues over the course of the week, we'll be hearing from some of the leading thinkers working to change mindsets in support of a greener future. I'd like now to introduce Dr. Alistair Clark, a trustee of TVE. Alistair is a managing director of the Environment and Sustainability Department at the EBRD. He leads a department of approximately 40 environmental and social specialists working to ensure that the bank's investments are sustainable. He's also a member of the UK Export Guarantee Advisory Council and represents the bank at many international agency meetings.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you all, wherever you might be. My name is Alistair Clark, and I've been a trustee of TVE for over 10 years. And as you can see, I work for a multilateral development bank, EBRD, here in London. Let me tell you briefly about these awards and introduce you to TVE and GFSA. TVE is a non-profit established in 1985. Our mission is to harness the power of film to drive real-world action for a more sustainable future. We've been pioneering environmental storytelling since 1985, working with a global network of filmmakers, environmental institutions, businesses, and campaigners. Funds from these awards support TVE's charity mission to use the power of film and storytelling to drive change for a more sustainable future. Our annual Global Sustainability Film Awards, started in 2012, recognise outstanding films from the business, non-profit, media and creative sectors that inspire audiences with real-world solutions for a more sustainable future. I have been privileged to participate in all of these awards, and I've seen some truly remarkable films about what sustainability means to large multinationals, smallholders in South America, to you at home, and from civil society groups. Each of us trying to make the world we live in more sustainable and more resilient for the years to come. The films are so varied, but so impressive. The global challenges we face as a society are immense and are growing. We head into the immediate future years with some nervousness, but also with hope. And that is what the awards are about, to document, to celebrate, but to give us hope and confidence that working together we can make a difference. So on behalf of all my fellow TVE trustees, I welcome you all to this online GFSA event. Thank you.
And now on to our first award of the day, Doing Business Differently. This is awarded to a film of less than 15 minutes in length that best explains how a company has changed their core business to become more sustainable. For example, by improving their supply chain, reducing their carbon emissions, eliminating waste, changing their financial model, or reducing their impact on biodiversity. Judges have shortlisted 3 films in this category. Films that explore sustainable packaging, the moral and financial imperative of business to protect our planet, and sustainable investment. Here's a glimpse of those films, along with some insights from the jury.
And the nominees are Helping People Put the Planet First, BBC Storyworks, Earth Dividend, Hannah Pereira, Button Media, Our Planet, Our Business, WWF UK.
TerraCycle is on a mission to eliminate the idea of waste. So across 21 countries, we work with amazing organizations to help collect and recycle what otherwise wouldn't be recyclable, from beauty waste to dirty diapers and many things in between. So at Loop, what we're doing is working with the world's most important consumer product companies to create reusable versions of their products. And when you're done with this, instead of having to clean it or refill it yourself, you simply throw it into a Loop reuse bin that gets picked up from you, or you drop it off at a store. And from there, we do everything. We clean out the package professionally. We then send it back to P&G, who refills it, and it goes right back on the shelf to go to the next person to enjoy a reusable experience.
With Loop, you order something, it comes to you. Every single thing that comes in the bag, you put back in the Loop tote and they take care of it. They send it to you, they will take it back. It's glorious.
People are really craving solutions. They want to help save the world as much as they can, but they also want to continue doing things the way they are. They want to buy the products they want. They want to be able to, at the end, throw them away. And so the big lesson for me has been, people really want to change, but we have to meet them where they are, but allow them to act much more reusable and much more sustainable behind the scenes. What gets me out of bed every morning is that we have the amazing opportunity to come up with these ideas and then work with the world's most important companies to implement them at real scale and have a real chance to shift the world in the right direction.
Look at the whole value chain of the business, not just their own operations, but also the product use and end of life, and also the supply chain of the business. And in recent Earth Dividends, we've picked up issues that have emerged from the supply chain, perhaps where a company doesn't have as much transparency and overview of employee working conditions in their supply chain, perhaps where they have an over-reliance on plastics or other materials, where we can potentially work in product redesign to make them less dependent on those materials. They can look at the Earth Dividend output knowing that the indicators are based on current best practice of sustainability in those different areas and feel confident that they're actually doing meaningful things. Seeing the riots in France over an attempt to put tax on fuel, I mean, the transition to a low carbon economy also has to be a just transition. So we need to think about the societal and economic impact of these issues as well, not just the environmental impact of them. You will never deliver genuine sustainable development unless you understand the total impact of everything you're doing. It's not good enough just to target positive impact in one or two areas. You have to understand the total footprint of the business.
If you ask millennials, what is the purpose of business? 47% said some version of the purpose of business is to improve society and protect the environment. This is a fundamental sea change in the way an entire generation thinks about business. It's going to mean if you want to attract the top talent and retain them, if you want to win over millennial customers and attract the $30 trillion of capital that's currently being given to millennials by the baby boomer generation, you're going to have a narrative around how your products are sustainable and healthy.
Sustainability is now the only business plan.
I think that in the future, when we look back, there will be two types of companies. Companies that got it and companies that didn't get it. I know which segment I'd like to belong to.
The only viable future is one in which business innovates to demand less of our world. In that future, the wild will recover. We can restore the balance of nature, fix the relationship between our planet and our business, and change the way we live on our planet for the better, forever.
Hi, it has been such an honor and a pleasure to be one of the judges for the Global Sustainability Film Awards. This is an incredible initiative which provides an opportunity and a platform for us to for films to be created that are not mainstream, that are not always going to be funded by the mainstream. It provides an opportunity for a voice for all generations of people, and it provides an entry point for us to have an understanding and a view on what the world needs today. I have been deeply honored to be a judge in this process, and it has been such an eye-opening experience. Every single film that I watched as a judge was of such a high caliber that it was incredibly difficult to actually pick one that I kept giving everything really high marks and thinking, oh, we've got to choose. And so luckily, it was done across a consensus of all the judges, because I really, really struggled. The quality of what was provided was very, very high, and every film was in a short space of time, and it was just made fantastically well. Such an honor. Thank you so much.
We'll be back a little later with the winner of that category. Throughout this week, we've been amplifying the voices of inspiring young people around the world who are working to build a more sustainable, just world. 40 young people have supported the TVE Global Sustainability Film Awards as youth ambassadors. One of them is Meghraj Rai, a student in Bhutan. He sent us this short film about the problem of waste in his community.
Good example. My name is Meghraj. I live in Bhutan and I currently study in Ketu College of Business Studies. There is a well-known saying, we have not inherited this earth from our forefathers. We have borrowed it from our children. So, every person on this earth should contribute his share towards the protection of this environment and not just waiting on the government to do everything. So what I really want to tell every individual is that people wasting their food is a major concern to the environment, because we are consuming more than what the earth can provide to us. So every individual can take action by changing their lifestyle. This is such a basic thought, yet so groundbreaking. So what individuals for the most part do is they purchase stuffs that are undeniably more than what they simply need. Furthermore, when it exceeds, they simply dump it away, and this is by one way or another going to impact the environment that we live in. Thus, the less you purchase, the less cash you will spend, at the point that when you purchase less, you are also reducing your environmental impact. So, consuming what you really need will really help the earth to recover. Healing is a process, and as a part of healing, it starts with changing your lifestyle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meghraj. And now onto our first Difficult Dialogue of the week. Difficult Dialogues runs an annual festival of ideas focused on an issue of contemporary relevance in Goa, India. This year, due to the coronavirus pandemic, that event has been moved online and combined with the Global Sustainability Film Awards to produce this week of films and ideas. The dialogue for today is about changing mindsets. I'd like now to introduce Andrew Wilson, President of the 2020 Global Sustainability Film Awards Advisory Board, who will moderate the discussion. Andrew is a change agent with expertise in sustainability and business. Until recently, he was Executive Director of Purpose at Edelman, the global PR and communications firm. He has more than 25 years' experience advising business leaders, working with companies across Europe, US, Russia, India, China, Japan, and elsewhere. He now works as an independent consultant, helping clients to develop and implement corporate strategies that deliver their commercial goals and social and environmental success.
Well, hello everyone. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to this TVE Difficult Dialogue session, which is part of the 2020 Global Sustainability Film Awards. I'm sure many of you will be aware of the two organisations behind the initiative, but for those that are not, let me just say a few words about each. TVE, Television for the Environment, was founded in 1984 with the mission to use the power of storytelling to drive real-world change for a more sustainable future. TVE works with filmmakers and partners globally to run media projects, making films that promote effective, evidence-based storytelling about environmental issues. And TVE has run the Global Sustainability Film Awards for the past 9 years. For this year, we are very excited about the collaboration with Difficult Dialogues. Difficult Dialogues is an annual 3-day forum based on themes of contemporary relevance. It organises intensive serial discussions that bring together a huge range of diverse stakeholders, including academics, young talents, celebrities, activists, politicians, leaders from the media, business and international organisations. Difficult Dialogues was founded by philanthropist Mrs. Serena Narula in 2016. And as I say, we're delighted that we've been able to build this collaboration. I think there's a natural partnership between TVE and Difficult Dialogues around the Global Sustainability Film Awards. So with that introduction, let's focus on today's theme, which is the need to change management mindsets. Management mindsets, the need to change mindsets, not just simply managers, everybody's mindset. I think for me, the inspiration behind that is that famous quote that is often attributed to Albert Einstein, the sense that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. We need a new way of thinking. We need a new mindset to create innovative solutions to the challenges facing the world today. More than that, we need action. It's not just about the way people think, it's about the way people act. And we need action at every level of society, institutionally, businesses, communities, and individuals, if this new mindset is going to alter both attitudes and behaviour. So I'm delighted to say that we've got 3 great speakers, all of whom are far better qualified than I am to speak to you today about these issues. I'm going to spend a minute more just introducing them to you briefly now before I hand it over to them to start our discussion. First of all, we'll hear from Tony Juniper, CBE. Tony is a campaigner, a writer, a sustainability advisor, and well-known environmentalist. He's been campaigning for more than 30 years, working for change towards a more sustainable society at the local, national, and international level. Today, he is chair of Natural England, which is a statutory body in the UK that works for the conservation and restoration of the natural environment in England. With his extensive experience, I've suggested that Tony might want to explore the kind of biggest challenge we face, which is shifting the imperative for environmental change, this recognised need for change, into real action. Our second speaker is Solidaire Townsend. Solidaire is the co-founder of Futera, which is described, I think, in a beautiful way. It's both a logical sustainability consultancy and a magical creative agency. Again, Solidaire has been a passionate changemaker for over 30 years. Through her work, she advises governments, charities, businesses and brands, including organisations like Google, IKEA and the United Nations, helping them to think about a better future and, more importantly, helping them to make it happen. Again, you should expect Solidaire to provide a wide-ranging overview of the issues, but I've asked her to speak a little bit about what action individuals or small groups can take to inspire others. And then our third speaker is Andrew Dunnett, who is director of the Vodafone Foundation, a post he has held for more than 10 years. During his time at Vodafone, Andrew has transformed the foundation's $1 billion program from an historic approach, which has been centered on grant making, to one that now combines giving with technology. And so doing, the foundation has been able to co-create a number of hugely innovative, award-winning sustainable programs. And among other topics, I've asked Andrew to touch on the role of business in acting as a catalyst for change. So we'll hear from each of the speakers for around 10 minutes each, after which I'll open it up to the audience for any questions or comments that you might like to share. So during the discussion, feel free to type in your comments and questions into the comment box, and we will pick them up at the end. But with that, I'm very pleased to hand it over to Tony to begin our conversation. Tony, please carry on.
Thank you very much indeed. I think it's fair to say that right action generally follows right thinking, and the thinking that we have at the moment across societies pretty much worldwide is leading us towards what can only be described as an environmental catastrophe. We see a lot of headlines devoted to the climate issue, the heating of the atmosphere, but also in parallel, and it's getting more attention, thankfully, these days, is the degradation of ecosystems and a mass extinction of animals and plants that's now unfolding across the world. And as we gather scientific evidence to remind us of the screaming urgency of these questions, still we travel in a very wrong direction. And some of this stuff goes very deep, because even though we're now accumulating a vast body of technical data to tell us about the dimensions of this, we still carry on as though we are immune to the consequences of this unraveling of the planet's biosphere and the destruction of the web of life. And this, for me, is at heart a crisis of perception, you might call it. And it's a perception that has evolved over some centuries now, to the point where humankind, and this is not everybody, but it's many people, including many leaders of major companies, financial institutions, and governments, they perceive humankind to exist outside of the natural world, to in some way be running in parallel to the realities of how this planet works. This goes back to the Enlightenment and the rise of scientific rationalism. It goes back to shifts in the major religions, even centuries before that, to the point where people believe that they can control nature and that they can deal with any problems caused through the degradation of the environment through new technology. You can see this at almost every turn in the popular discussions that go on. And so that crisis of perception, in part, is a reflection of the evolution of ideas and the human-centric view based upon technology and innovation that we can solve any problem. It's also based upon a much more personal and visceral disconnection from the natural environment that has progressively gone hand in hand with urbanization. So for all of human history, until a couple of hundred years ago, we lived very close to nature. We were aware of the cycles, and we knew that natural systems functioning underpinned human well-being. The more we have now migrated away from connections with nature into towns and cities, which increasingly don't require us to go outside at all, in a cold chain from your air-conditioned house to your air-conditioned car to your air-conditioned gym to your air-conditioned supermarket, you don't even need to know that the climate is changing, because you can insulate yourself in a very real way from those vagaries of seasonal disruptions that are taking place all around us. And so that rise of scientific capacity and capability, leading to an arrogance as to our dependence on nature or lack of dependence on nature, is the perception, plus that progressive disconnection with the natural environment has led us to a very dangerous place. Now, if we are going to be able to fix this, we're going to need to re-embed human societies in the natural world. And the place we've reached at the moment, and this is visible every day, listen to the news and look at the pronouncements of various companies, we've become used to the idea of seeing the destruction of nature as at best regrettable, but nonetheless inevitable, because that's what we have to do in order to grow our economies, create jobs, to be able to improve living standards. And that is the way in which the modern economic system works. So if we are going to heal this crisis of perception and find right action following right thinking, the right action, first and foremost, has to go to the heart of economics. We cannot carry on growing our economies in the way that we do on a finite planet. And if we are going to translate this increasing awareness about our fundamental dependence on nature into things that are going to change anything, then it needs to be in our economic system. I often point out to leaders of companies and governments that the human economy is a 100% wholly owned subsidiary of nature. If you destroy the holding company, you destroy the subsidiary, which is what keeps all of us going. It supplies us with all of our jobs and our economic development. And the more we remove the pillars that hold all of that up, the more we imperil human well-being into the future. And this is quite a flip in the narrative, because until recently, we've all been led to believe that economic growth will solve all of our problems. But if it's destroying the natural systems that enable the economy to exist in the first place, then this is quite a flip in understanding that is needed. It's beginning to happen, but of course there are many vested interests who do very well out of the status quo, have done for a long time. They've invested in taking returns from infrastructure and supply chains that are based upon old business as usual rather than the new imperative of future business. And so there is a massive momentum that lies behind the old system. What we now need are real leaders to step up, to develop the new kinds of business models that are fit for the future, circular economies based upon the renewable use of energy, the restoration of land through ecological agriculture, and the rebuilding of damaged ecosystems from forests to coral reefs. That is what we must now do in order to protect the interests not only of future generations, but actually even our own, such as the pace of change that's now taking place. Fortunately, there are still glimmers of a philosophy that used to unite people with the planet that sustains us all. And you can see that in the indigenous communities who still live in some of the last remaining natural ecosystems, deep in the rainforests of the Amazon, for example. You can find human societies, people identical to us, who take a very different view. And that gives me great hope to the extent that what we're living through is not inevitable. People can and do think differently. It's just that we've fallen into a rather lazy mindset in Western societies whereby we assume we can do whatever we like and there always will be a technological solution. It's not true. We have to change our relationship with the natural world. Otherwise, it's going to change its relationship with us and it won't be very pleasant. So I always approach my work with a great deal of optimism because I know that these problems are solvable, but the action we need, the right action we need, won't come without the right thinking that we need. And that right thinking needs to fix that crisis of perception and for us all to understand that we are in nature as much as any bird, fish, or tree.
Great. Tony, that is a fantastic start for our discussion. I love the way you balance the real imperative for change, but with a note of optimism there. Before I hand it over to Solitaire, I'd just like to ask one question. You talked about the disconnection from nature, and you made that point very powerfully. It just occurred to me that some commentators have, when talking about the COVID pandemic, have said, you know, during a global shutdown, people were beginning to reconnect with nature, you know, bird songs in the city, fresh air, clean air. Do you feel there's any truth in that? And do you feel that that was a sufficient kind of reminder of the importance of the environment to our lives?
Yeah, yes, it's a very real thing. The world was forced to go local in a very abrupt way. And many of the things that we would normally do, go shopping, go to play bowling, go to bingo, go to the pub, those things were suddenly cut off. What we're left with in terms of where we all live are those green spaces where we can safely go outside and reconnect with the natural world and find spaces for reflection and derive those very real benefits for health and well-being that we know come with access to high quality natural environments. And so that has been happening. And if you just look around the way green spaces are being used now, especially in the urban areas, there are many, many more people than there were before. And people are going back more and more because they're finding it's actually really very nice. And so this could be some part of how that re-healing of the relationship between people and the natural environment could at least begin, is through more of us reconnecting with the natural environment. But we've got so much further to go. And
Right.
the way in which we plan our towns and cities in particular into the future need to reflect that.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Tony. So Solitaire, Fantastic, thought-provoking start to the conversation. I know a lot of your work is about helping individuals to think through the scale of the challenge and take small actions that are meaningful. Perhaps you want to start there. I don't know. What's your perspective on all of this?
So I think I will see Tony's optimism, and I might up it a bit in the fact that for the decades that I've been doing this, I've held on to this belief that within my lifetime, if I'm lucky enough, there will be 10 billion healthy, educated, free people creating and making and doing whatever it is that drives them within a recovering natural world. And it took me a long time to learn to say that we can have 10 billion healthy, free, educated people living in a recovering natural world where the rest of life on Earth is beginning to return and thrive. And the reason why it takes quite a lot to say that is because, holy crap, that's not what it looks like right now. On either the free, healthy, educated people side or the recovering natural world side. But I think it's really important to learn how to say that, to learn how to say out loud what it is that we're shooting for. And that's at a really big level. But you asked me to talk about the individual level, those 7 to 10 billion human beings around the world. Because I feel very passionately, and it's been borne out in the work that I do, is that we sort of have this dichotomy between sort of people power and powerful people. And some people very much focus on the powerful people, on the business leaders, the CEOs, the governments, the institutions. And then some people very much focus on the people power, on the individuals, on the billions of actions, be they actions to buy differently or actions to vote differently. And I think reality lies somewhere in between, because to misquote Plato, he who rules public opinion rules the world. And that actually all we are is individuals. Even those powerful people up here, all they are is individuals as well. They may have access to institutional power, but all they are is a person. So I always start with where people are. And around the world at the moment, we have some very worried people. A couple of years ago, we did a survey of 26 countries, 20,000 people around the world, and we discovered that 14% of people, 14% of people now think that things like climate change are like nothing can be done about them. They're fatalistic about it. And that number goes up the younger someone is. So actually it's up to 30% of our under 30s. Up to 30% of our under 30-year-olds don't think there is any future. The impact on mental health, on well-being, on ambition, on desire to do anything with your life, on antisocial behaviour, and all these issues are so huge when you've got a whole lot of people who think the monster is coming to get them. So for me, the most important mindset that you can hold on to is the solutionist mindset. Is the fact that actually we can still fix this. I sometimes worry that the mindset that we have in our head is a sort of Frankenstein mindset, that we sort of made a monster, we created a monster out of our own hubris, and now it's going to kill us. It's quite a satisfying narrative. That's quite a satisfying story to have in your head, that human beings are bad and we're destined for a bad end, that we've destroyed nature and nature will destroy us. I see that a lot in the movement of which we're part. But of course, there is a whole other mindset. It's the Harry Potter mindset, the Lord of the Rings mindset, the James Bond mindset, the story of actually fighting against the odds, standing up against what's wrong, standing up for what's right, coming together with unexpected allies, people you weren't expecting to work alongside, and using sort of pluck and gumption and a bit of guile and a bit of luck to actually face down the monster. And that's the story which I think people need. And in that story, they want to be the hero. In that story, we want to have something to do. And I think that's where the people power rather than powerful people becomes really important. Because if you don't give people a role, if all of us don't feel that we have a role, that we have a stake, that we have skin in the game, there's something which we can do, that we can make a difference, we become audience only to the greatest challenge, the greatest story that's happening in the world. And that would be absolutely deathly if we became audience only, because actually there is no way that these changes are going to happen unless people are prepared to change how they live, how they vote, how they travel, what they eat, what they teach their children, how they gather, and as Tony says, how they regard themselves in the world. And so that's why a couple of years ago, in partnership with United Nations Environment Programme, UNDP, IGES, SEI, and a whole load of sort of big acronym organisations, we created the Good Life Goals. Because the Sustainable Development Goals, if you don't know them, go and find out about them. There's 17 big headline goals with a whole load of targets underneath for 2030, which are basically the to-do list for humanity. You know, you kind of got that to-do list for yourself, you know, call my mum, go to the dentist, sort out the broken washing machine. This is the to-do list for humanity: end poverty, deal with gender rights, protect nature. And so those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and there's lots that could be said about whether they're right or good or perfect, but they are the best gathering of all the social and environmental things which we need to do. However, they were written for institutions, for governments, actually, primarily. That's who ratified them. And they've been adopted by a lot of big businesses around the world because they're sort of at that big institution level. The problem with them is they absolutely deny any role for the individual. The rest of us are supposed to sit back and watch whilst governments and businesses fix this or don't. And so what we did with the Good Life Goals is we looked at those 17 and we translated with the scientists what were the biggest actions that individuals could take, that if they were taken at a billion level, so if 1 billion people took them, they would have a measurable impact on the targets of the SDGs. Now that meant some things didn't make it in there, because there's some behaviours which we might do that might feel like good behaviours but don't make that much of a difference. But there's other ones that did. And they're not all buying behaviours. They're not all about buying differently. They're about saving, investing, demanding, learning, teaching your kids, speaking up for things, opposing. The word vote isn't there because it's the United Nations. This has to apply worldwide. And we worked really alongside a lot of researchers and indeed Indigenous people to make sure that it represented what under consumers around the world can do rather than just what over consumers do. And I prefer that language to sort of rich countries or poor countries, because we're talking about people here. And there's lots of over consumers in poor countries and lots of under consumers in rich countries. And as we worked through that, what we realised was all of things intersect. The things which you would want to do to be healthy as an individual, the things which are going to make you lose a few pounds if you're overweight, that would improve your health and well-being, that would increase your mental acumen, the things which you want to do for your body and your longevity and your sleep, are the same things which are good for the planet. Because, of course, as Tony said, why would they not be? We're part of nature, so the things which actually are good for our long-term well-being, of course, are also good for nature, because that's how we evolved. The things which are good for our economies are also the things which are good for nature in terms of the long term. The things which are good for our families are also things which are good for nature. So we discover there's a lot of crossovers. And of course, we see that with things like renewable energy, that renewable energy for the individual can help free entire villages in the Himalayas who they're never going to get a coal power station. Halfway up the Himalayas, literally carrying solar panels up on their heads up into the mountains in order to be able to, for the first time, bring light in the evenings, mobile phone connection to people, and to begin to discover this intersection. And then right at this moment, what I feel right at this moment, whilst we're in this big weirding, this terrible pandemic, which is having such a negative impact in so many people's lives and an impact on every people's life, it's almost like the first truly global moment we've had, at least during my lifetime. Even the other global moments we had actually were more around one country or more around one culture. This is the first truly global moment we've had. It's almost like girding us for what's to come and getting us used to this idea that perhaps as a species, as a collective, we're going to face these challenges. And what it's also doing is absolutely showing us how gender justice, racial justice, poverty all intersect with the environment. You can't solve one without the other. I just want to acknowledge that because, of course, as Tony said, there's a great deal of wisdom, a great deal of insight that can be taken from other cultures, and cultures which aren't represented here on an all-white panel, but that cultures where we can listen and we can learn and we can begin to open our mind of what's possible. And of course, what all of this comes down to, the absolute basis of this for the individual, is it's quite hard to ask individuals, to ask people to sit there and think about the whole planet. As a person, the planet can feel like quite a lot to get your head around, or even, you know, billions of people can be quite a lot to get your head around, or even your own government can be quite a lot to get your head around. What you can get your head around as an individual, what any of us can, is that doing good things feels good. That trying to, if you are scared and terrified and anxious around what's going on in the world, if you are worried about the future, if you look at your children and you're scared about what their life is going to be like, if you're fearful of others and fearful for yourself, the very best thing you can do is to try to do something to make the world a better place. And that is, you know, that's what gives me hope more than anything, because we are just animals. All of us are just animals, but we're social animals. And we've evolved an endocrine system that gives us a positive feedback when we do things which are good for others. It's called the helper's high. It's very well known. It's very well known in psychology and sociology that when we do things which are good for others or good for nature, when we do something which we believe is going to make the world a better place, we get a positive feedback loop to ourselves. It's one of the reasons why volunteering is, people who volunteer are more likely to be happy and people who volunteer are more likely to live long. It's because of that helper's high. So the main way we can engage this mindset change is not necessarily asking people to think about, asking all of us, asking me to think about these big, huge global issues, but just to say, if you want to stop feeling scared, do something about what scares you. If you want to stop being worried about the future, do something to make it better. Because the very last of the Good Life goals that we wrote, the very last point of the last Good Life goal of all 17 of them, is to make tomorrow better than today. And I think that that's the kind of mindset shift, that tomorrow could be better than today. It doesn't automatically have to be worse. That's the big mindset shift that I would like to see, is basically a mindset shift towards hope.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Solitaire. Again, a very wide-ranging discussion, some really interesting points. If you'll forgive me, I just wanted to pick up on one point of detail. It struck me, this kind of dichotomy almost between powerful people and people power. One thing you said about that is that actually powerful people are individuals as well. And I think, I don't know, in my experience, particularly working with business leaders, they are beginning to realize as individuals they have a responsibility and they want to leave a positive legacy. Not just, it's no longer about, you know, well, this company's delivered the best shareholder returns for the past 5 years. It's actually a positive legacy around the issues we've been talking about. Do you think, A, have you observed that yourself, and B, how powerful do you think that change is?
100%. You know, I run a company. I spend a lot of time working with big businesses. I spend a lot of my time writing business cases to give people permission for what they want to do as a human being. So they already want to do the right thing. You've got to write the business case to give them that permission. But we are seeing that, and we're seeing that across the board. And one of the biggest drivers of positive change in business right now is the kids of CEOs, like absolutely fundamentally changing. And, you know, again, part of that is because we've raised a generation, Gen Zs, even if not the millennials, the Gen Zs, who are quite hardcore about these issues. Mm-hmm. They're not very, you know, the millennials were very driven by purpose. They were very driven by sort of quite an individualistic response. They wanted sort of good quality, and they wanted all of these things and sustainability at the same time. The Gen Zs are a little bit harder in terms of what they expect from businesses, what they expect from leaders, and what they expect from their parents. And I think we're beginning to see some of that through in terms of the many crises we face. The intergenerational crisis is one of them, and probably the one that over time might have the biggest impact, is that if we could actually begin to get a sense of the generations working with each other rather than against each other in terms of these social changes, would probably move a lot faster.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Solitaire. So Andrew, we've heard two great expositions about the scale of the challenge. The level of optimism has been there. Solly ramped it up a little. What are you going to do for us? Are we going to be more optimistic or slightly more realistic, Andrew?
Okay. Well, can I start with a question you asked me, and then you can find out whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic on the way I answer the question. But I mean, the question was, what is the role of business as a catalyst for change?
Mm-hmm.
And when I was sort of thinking about the question, I said, well, what is the change that you want us to do? You know, and then we'll come to the catalyst. But what actually is the change? And I summarize the change in four ways, really. How do we decarbonize the global economy? How do we move to a circular regenerative economy? How do we move demanding markets back to the long term? And how do we create an economic system which is inclusive? All of which we need to do in a global pandemic, okay, with everything else that is happening at the moment. But if you say, well, I think that's probably pretty comprehensive 4 points around the change that you want. And I agree with what you've said. I agree with what Solitaire has said, that really people are seeing business as part of the solution rather than part of the problem. It's a massive generalization, but I think there's been something of a change. I read, I think it was Ronald Cohen's book, you know, who talked about the age of philanthropy between 1800 and 1940, I think it was, and then the age of government from 1940 to about 1990, 2000. And now corporations have got to be part of the solution. And there's a sort of, you know, there's a general acceptance of that. But also, I think probably also still a healthy degree of cynicism about how they go about that. But for me, you know, the key point, the first point I want to make is when you're looking at change, those are the four things that I think we should be ruthlessly focused on in judging the business community on what they're doing. Okay, and then that sort of led me to sort of two reflections on it. You know, surprisingly, it's sort of been mentioned already. Number one is about the right thinking, and Tony mentioned this. And I think the first thing I would say is it's going to come down to people, and I don't mean business leaders. I mean all 105,000 people who work for Vodafone, all 50 people who work for the SME down the road from home where I am in the local garage. You know, it's not about necessarily the leaders. It's about the people. And when I meet, you mentioned I've done 10 years in Vodafone, and whenever you meet anybody and you talk about this agenda, I always have a sort of triangulation in my mind, okay, as to where this person sits. I'm trying to work out where they're coming from on these issues of change. You know, in the bottom left, I still put the Friedmanites. You know what I mean? That the 1970 crowd who read that essay in the New York Times and still haven't moved on. Okay, they're a dying breed, but there are still some people who really, if they're very, very honest, they are still in the bottom left of the triangle. You get others who are in the bottom right, okay, who realize that things have moved on, and that for regulatory reasons and for compliance reasons, and if even they don't understand those, or it's quite dangerous to live in a world and do business where you're not actually familiar with what those are, but there is a whole raft of that regulation and compliance that has come in since 1970 that they need to deal with. And then if that doesn't get them, something called reputation management normally gets them. You know, what is the value of the company that is in the reputation and the brand of the company? Because in 1970, pre-CNN, which was the first global media operator, the whole idea of reputation management was relatively limited to what it is today. So I think there are, when you're talking either to an individual and you're trying to share what you want to do in terms of be a catalyst, or you're talking to a leader, then some of them are in that space. And then I think there are others who are in the space which you do hear and increasingly hear, which is sort of where's the world going and what's our role in it? You know what I mean? CEOs who've moved into that space, and individuals of whatever age and whatever generation who want to work for a company that has a very clearly defined purpose, and want to work for a leader who looks over the hedge, who has an ambition that is more than whatever is the simple ambition that the company has put within their performance dialogue goals. So I think that's the sort of, for me, I think the first point I want to make is that it's really, as Tony said, it's about thinking and it's about people of every level of the organization thinking that way. It's not just, there is something from the top, the tone from the top, of course, makes a huge difference. Of course, makes a huge difference in a big organization. But actually, through the various platforms that are now there that employees are using to provide feedback, to provide comment, to communicate with each other, there is a rising breadth of opinion across all organization about these issues. If you say, what's the best example in Vodafone in 10 years that I've worked there of that catalyst thinking? There's lots of examples. I was reading the Safaricom Sustainable Business Report over the weekend. I think it was, I made a note of it. Let me just have a look. I think 6% of the GDP of Kenya is the contribution of Safaricom. 1 million direct employees and so on and so forth. But it made me think of the example, of course, of M-Pesa. If you talk about business as a catalyst for change, which was set up by Nick Hughes when he worked in the sustainable business team at Vodafone, a very simple money transfer system for the unbanked, where you can't send money because you don't have a bank account, but you can send money handset to handset. Okay, and set up initially with a DFID grant. Now 54 million people across sub-Saharan Africa using that every day of the week. And we've seen, reports suggesting that 30% of the GDP of Kenya is going through the M-Pesa platform. It's been an incredible success, not only in empowering people, but also in enabling people to get access to finance, to investments, and also, in terms of just providing. I think the latest report was done. I think it's looking at about 200,000 in the last 2 to 3 years lifted out of abject poverty as a result of getting access to microfinance, which came through M-Pesa. So really, if you say what's our best example of a catalyst for change, I would say Nick Hughes, Michael Joseph, who was then CEO of Safaricom, now chairman, and Bob Collymore, who's sadly no longer with us, died last year. But Bob really took that on. So I think the first point I want to make is it's about the people, it's about the thinking, and maybe we can talk about how you do that. But that is absolutely critical to success. I think the second one point is it's around, and Solitaire know a lot more about this than I do because I only work for one company. She works for many. But I think it's around the whole purpose discussion and agenda, purpose-led companies, which has really come very fast and furious in the last sort of 3 or 4 years. Around what is it that you do as a company that at the very core of your business strategy will address some of those things, or if not all of those things that I talked about as the change that we need to drive. And when you start thinking like that, and you leave behind that sort of CSR, sustainable business, semi-detached mindset, and you move very much into the core of the DNA of the company and why this company exists, then you're getting into a completely different landscape as well. And I think the investor Larry Fink has been very helpful on this for companies of our size. His annual CEO's letters have really facilitated a lot of discussion around shareholder versus stakeholder, and have been incredibly helpful in moving that debate forward, because he hasn't come from the perhaps the more predictable side of the debate. He's come from the other side of the debate, and really moved the discussion. And I think, again, just to simplify, what has he actually said? He said that the 6 trillion that he's investing, he's looking that they do more than profit. They have a purpose and make a positive contribution to society. And they be, thirdly, which is really interesting, they'd be leaders in a divided world. And he said recently, as July, I was watching him on some news channel, I can't remember which one. Purpose informs strategy and culture, which leads to sustainable performance. So I think the second point I just want to make is I see a real positive move forward in. I only work in companies of our size rather than other sizes, but you see a real discussion breaking forth and action being taken in how you move historically what was something which could be quite semi-detached into something which is very much focused as part of the strategy discussion, the board discussion, and with the result that you can begin to move things at a much faster pace than we could before. And in my own company, in Vodafone, we've seen with a new global CEO, we've seen a complete refresh of our thinking. We now have 3 very clear pillars that are wired into the board's success metrics, are wired into everything from from how we work with our procurement, to individuals within the company being measured on this, and they are around building digital society, halving our environmental impact, and bringing improving the lives of 1 billion people within the network and the countries in which we're operating. And maybe just sort of give you, so what does that mean in reality? And maybe we can discuss this in a minute, but I just perhaps focus on the inclusion element. We've done a lot on inclusion for a long time in Vodafone around diversity and inclusion. But this means bringing forward products and services to bring 50 million women into our network by 2025. It means launching, which we did a few months ago, as the first global company to launch a domestic violence policy, enabling those who are at risk of abuse within our employee base to have up to 10 days paid leave every year, and enabling them to seek help and get assistance and so on. The other thing that we're very strongly focused on is the lack of girls within our network, adolescent girls, in a number of the markets in which we're operating, where boys are 1.5 times more likely to get access to connectivity and all the benefits that come with that, as opposed to girls. And we've just working with Girl Effect brought another 8 million girls into the network, getting access to the sort of learning and access to finance and all the other things that they're missing. Final point, possibly on we looked at charitable giving, as part of that discussion, and we decided that the patient capital that comes with charitable giving has a place in the modern day company, and therefore we decided to carry on with our charitable giving, but continuing to focus it down on a very strong social investment model connected to our core competency as a company. So maybe and just sort of summarize, really, I think the challenges are enormous. I agree completely with Tony in terms of his picture of where things are at. I think the challenges for companies need to be really focused down on perhaps the 4 things that I mentioned at the start. We are behind on the global goals. We're not where we ought to be. We've got a heck of a challenge over the next 5 to 10 years. But I think having the right people and having the right purpose in terms of companies and where that's wired into the company and its success metrics is critical to us getting there.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. Really thought-provoking on the role of business there. I did want to dig a little bit deeper and give you the opportunity to talk about something that you raised about how do you make this happen in a business, particularly perhaps a large business. I was very struck with what you're saying about purpose, because for me, purpose is too often seen to be, oh, there's a social issue out there or an environmental issue, and as a company, we need to have a response and we have a good communications campaign. And it talks nothing about the strategy of the business. And I am a strong believer that purpose is actually about your core business strategy, your sustainability strategy, as well as that social change element. But if we're talking about strategy, as you were, one of the things that strike me, I think it's Peter Drucker who famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And this idea about, the culture of the organization is a thing that's going to bring about change. Yes, we can have the strategic discussion, but to me, that kind of points to, well, it's about the way, as you were suggesting, not only leaders, but everybody in the organization follows the cultural lead and behaves in a way that is appropriate to the strategy to make it happen. Does that question make sense? I mean, how do you look at that tension between culture and strategy? For me, it's not enough simply to have a strategy to address social and environmental issues. There's something culturally that needs to change mindsets.
I think there's about 15 questions in there, Andrew. Let me pick the one I like. Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there, and it's all very good. My I think there's two things I would say in terms of comment. I think the sort of argument that the successful companies of the future will be the sustainable companies, the companies that really take these the position as Tony outlined as to where we are and hardwire that into their future. As we found time and time again, that when you do that, then actually you save money, you make money. You know, it's not just a case of trade-offs. You're actually in a much better position. So I think there's an external voice that needs to be turned up more and more in the volume on that this is, you know, this is good for business, that the sustainable companies will be the companies of the future. I think for us and internally, you know, whenever I stand up and talk about the work that we're doing, which is transforming lives, and you know, you get an amazing response. When I began the job, you would say, well, we've supported this charity and that charity, and there would be no reaction in the room. Okay. And you know, you had a year or so thinking, no one really cares. Okay. You know what I mean? No one really, you know, we're giving to this charity, and that charity, but it's not getting an emotional reaction with people. And the previous CEO was a very shrewd guy, Vittorio Colau, and I did one session with the top 200. And he said to me as he left Andrew, he said, great presentation, said, but we need to connect the giving and the technology. And that's the way we should go. So we changed the whole program to look at how we could use technology alongside NGOs and charities to make the world a better place. When you address an audience of 200 people and they see how the core purpose of the company is transforming people's lives, is bringing people out of poverty, is enabling women with obstetric fistula to get surgery so they can get back their dignity, is protecting people in abusive relationships, you don't have to worry about emotional reaction. It comes. You know what I mean? They could be having the most miserable day. They could be struggling to hit their targets. But my experience, time and time again, is when you share with people in an authentic way how the core purpose of the company is making the world a better place, then you have people and you've got them. So I think there's a sort of there's a two-pronged attack to continue what's happening. One is the external voice. You know, as Tony said, the world as it is, you know, that needs to be explained and explained. And then the opportunity that this presents for companies, or if not, if you're in a fixed mindset, you're going to stay in your fixed mindset and you won't be around in the future. And then I think, as you say, culturally, internally, I don't know what it is for, you know, other companies, but I know for our company, connectivity is the stuff of humanity, enabling people like we are now to communicate. And that's what we need to really impress and engage with our 100,000 people about, because my experience is once they get that, then you know, you've connected the dots.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to thank all three of you. You've more than fulfilled the brief in raising all of these issues, giving us huge amount of thought-provoking information. Before we hand it over to the questions from the audience, I just wanted to give each of you the opportunity, a kind of couple of minutes just to summarize on your reflections on what you've heard and final thoughts before we turn to the questions from our audience. Tony.
Do you know what I'm thinking at the end of this conversation, Andrew? You know, quite a lot of what goes on around these sustainability discussions, you know, it's about data, it's about parts per million, it's about technology. I think what this conversation has just confirmed, and Andrew and Solly have done a fantastic job in just bringing this out, is how this is much more a matter of psychology and philosophy. And these areas, they hardly get talked about when we're thinking through the reaction to these existential crises that are upon us. And so philosophy, you know, it's embedded in the idea of purpose. That's a philosophical question. What are we here for? You know, why does this organization exist? And then when it comes to rallying that support to make it exist for something that's beyond, you know, the day-to-day bottom line and the mundane and shareholder value, and it's about improving conditions for people and planet, then, you know, it's the psychology of that, as Solly so eloquently laid out, in terms of how we engage people at a very human and personal level. And so, yeah, the great conversation. Thank you all for that. And I'm just left with that. That, you know, science and technology take us so far, but it's actually philosophy and psychology that's where the answers actually lie.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. Solitaire.
Thank you. And please do call me Solly. It's a much more sensible name. Building on what Tony and indeed what Andrew raised as well, climate change is too often, particularly climate change, is too often seen as a crisis of chemistry, of our atmospheric chemistry. It's not, it's a crisis of culture. The chemistry bit's quite easy. Actually, many of our environmental challenges are quite easy. We have the solutions to them. We've had them for a long time. It's people who are complicated. That's the bit that we have to get right now, these messy, complicated human beings. And let's be clear, in the very short period of time that we've been studying our climate, we probably have much greater clarity on how it functions than in the centuries, millennia of trying to study human beings. We still don't understand how our brains work, even if we increasingly understand how the entirety of our biosphere works. So that's starting with the people first. And I think it's one of the reasons why we've got a lot of very frustrated scientists at the moment who have been providing us this information in very clear ways to businesses, to governments, to individuals, and wondering why it hasn't changed. It's because actually people are messy. And I'd also really like to reflect on some of the themes that we've had come up today around gender, around race, around different perspectives, and the necessity to make sure that this conversation isn't a conversation that these mindsets that we're thinking about are not all mindsets of rich white people, and that we're actually really reflecting on the fact that there is not a singular human mindset. That there might be a basic human reality that we all experience, but in terms of mindsets, there are multiple ones of great value all across the world. And if we only reflect on how we change one mindset, which might, to be fair, be the mindset of the majority of CEOs in the world, or the mindset of the majority of political leaders at the moment, but there is not only one perspective that it's worth bringing to the table here. And there's a lot that we can all learn and connect to from mindsets that are different to our own.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Solly. Andrew, final thought before we turn to questions?
Well, it's been lovely to be part of the conversation, and I'm really enjoying it. And I think there's just two things that really come, to mind. One from Tony around the right thinking. At the end of the day, it's a battle of minds on this. It's people have to understand and to really engage intellectually around a lot of these issues. And I think that that's something I take responsibility for the organization I'm working in to do that, and to work with my colleagues on that. I think the second thing is it's around as Solly said, it's around people power. There is phenomenal I think there's a lot of people within work are really aware of these issues more than ever before. You know what I mean? And therefore the opportunity to embrace that and to really capitalize on that is huge. And again, I have to take responsibility on my own organization for doing that. I think on a positive note, Andrew, you and I used to work with the government together back in about 2006, I think it was, on some of these issues. And when you look back, we've come a long way, a huge way from when we were working with the government on these issues. But I think, I'm just mindful of Tony's challenge. I mean, we've got a heck of a challenge in terms of climate change and these issues. So, and the SDGs and delivering them. So, we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go.
Excellent. Thank you all very much again. Unsurprisingly, there's a huge amount of comment and questions coming from our audience. So I'll now begin to read some of those out, and we can deal with the questions now. Okay, let's begin then, please, with the questions. Perhaps not surprisingly, with such provocative ideas, you've generated a lot of comments and questions. We will do our best to try and get through them in the next 10 to 12 minutes. The first thing I must say, though, is that very unfortunately, Tony has had to drop out. He had a previous commitment, and whilst he was happy to contribute, he won't be able to answer any of your questions. But we will put those to him and try and get some answers through on social media to you all. So with that, let me try and begin some of the questions. The first one, Andrew, is aimed at you. You mentioned about initiatives aimed at female inclusion, like the domestic violence policy and the drive to acquire more young women across your network. The question then becomes, do you see this move to increase female engagement and empowerment changing mindsets towards the environment or climate change?
Yes, a good question, Andrew. And I mean, I think the focus has really been on the power of connectivity with regards to education. So, you know, we're working with Girl Effect. 8 million girls have had access to their informal learning across Vodafone footprint as a result of us working with them. Employment, where we have this commitment to bring another 50 million women, as I mentioned, within the network by specific products that are focused and at a level that they can purchase and are interested in. And then, of course, I think the third one that we mentioned was, you know, was around empowerment, and that's obviously education and employment is part of that. But I think in particular, we've done a lot of work around abusive relationships, domestic violence, with 1 million women accessing various apps that we developed, 7 markets running the Bright Sky and 8 running other forms of that app. So I think, you know, we've really focused on that, but I think it's a great question and a great challenge. You know, and I think it can only be good in terms of the climate, but we haven't really then looked at corralling, if you like, or adding a fourth area to the work. So I like the question. I really appreciate the challenge, and I need to think about that more, because I think it's a great challenge. But I think what we've done can only benefit. But I think the questioner is saying, well, would you open a specific corridor of activity in that? And I need to really think about that. It's a great suggestion.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Andrew. Solly, you talked a lot about generational issues, but one of the participants wanted to go a bit further and picked up on another theme about this solutions-focused approach. How do you think we can encourage that mindset in the younger generation, and particularly in children?
It's a brilliant question. And there are 3 wonderful children in my family, Grace, Winter and Alana, and they're all born solutionists. I actually think most children are. They're searching, they're learning, they're trying to find answers. Climate change is causing a lot of anxiety and fear in a lot of young people. And it feels like something which only adults can help solve. But all of us can do something. Even the very youngest can enjoy doing the recycling at home, for example. So what I would say is encourage children to think creatively, to think big, to think crazy thoughts, to draw the answers, to make posters and to do things around the home. Because as well as learning about issues such as climate change, we also need to learn about taking action on them. If anything, the second is probably more important.
Great, thank you both. And at this stage, I've got to say, I'm glad I'm just posing the questions and not having to answer them, because this next one is for both of you and it is really challenging. So perhaps, Andrew, you'd pick it up first. The questioner recognises that changing the mindset is crucial in advocating sustainability, but they also raise the challenge that there's a huge gap in terms of accessibility and affordability in developing economies. So how do we bring about a shift in that situation? How do we drive sustainability where issues of affordability and accessibility are real challenges?
I think the way you focus on that is to look at those companies and organizations and individuals and NGOs who are really making a difference and enabling change to happen. So, I mean, if you look across the Vodafone group, you know, one of the companies that we're most proud of in terms of what they do is, of course, Safaricom. And, you know, the impact that they have, which I mentioned briefly, you know, in the few words that I said. So I think that affordability, of course, is a really legitimate question and concern. But I think it comes back to a sense of leadership and purpose, and whether that's in an NGO, a small, very small, business, a large company, or indeed in the sort of political channels. That sense of vision and commitment is what is absolutely critical, I think. So it's a fair question, a fair challenge, and of course resources do make a substantial difference. But I think before the resourcing, there needs to be a sense of vision as to, well, what do we want to do, what do we want to achieve, what do we want to change, and we've certainly seen that in one of our companies in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in Safaricom, and the impact that they've had.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Solly, some thoughts?
I'm really pleased someone asked this question, because let's be honest, this is a panel of white Western over-consumers talking about how to change sustainability, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. Around the world, there are solutionists in every part of the world, and from representing every mindset. There's not a single mindset we're talking about here. I was privileged enough to work with the United Nations on the Good Life Goals. And the Good Life Goals are a translation, as I said, of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals into things which we can all do. And the big challenge there was, what can we all do? 7.5 billion of us, over consumers and under consumers, with very, very different access to the levers of power. We can all aspire to the world that we want. We can lift each other up and lift up each other's voices. We can ask for change, and we can live a life that is dedicated to service and connection to others. However, across the world, there's a number of people, and the term is under consumers, who actually need to have access to more. Have access to more education, more resources. And I think one of the biggest challenges of this year, I'm not going to say the 2020s because we don't have the whole decade. One of the biggest challenges of this year that we need to start working on right now is putting the concept of justice into these difficult dialogues, and putting the concept of fairness and access, not just access to resources, but sometimes also access to panels such as this.
Great. And I think it is appropriate for me to give an unashamed plug to the work of both TVE and Difficult Dialogues, and particularly actually in this event, the Global Sustainability Film Awards, because I think there's huge examples there, really inspiring, engaging examples of what's happening in developing economies. So it isn't just one perspective. I think you're right there. I think we've got time for one more question each. If we rush through it, we maybe got another couple that we can cover. Solly, why don't I ask you this one? Again, one of the strong themes from your contribution was this encouraging a change mindset towards hope. What, in your opinion, is the one thing that we can do as individuals to help in this direction?
There are answers in the question. Do something. One of the biggest mistakes that people make about mindsets is thinking that the mindset comes before the action, that you change your mind and you take the action. I'm going to let you into a secret. It's the other way around. Our mindsets follow our behaviors. Change what you do and your mind will adapt around it. There's a whole load of good science about why around the fact that actually it's easier to change your mind than your behaviors, etc. It's one of the reasons why we put so much effort into changing what people do, because then that's how we change how we think. So if you're worried, if you're scared, if you're concerned, if you're anxious about the world, rather than trying to change that mindset, go and do something small. Do your recycling, turn the light off, help another person, smile at somebody, volunteer, give blood, any number of things that you might be able to do. Do something, and then you'll feel the mindset change. Also, the other thing, we talk a lot about mindsets as if they're disconnected from our hearts and how we feel. And actually, hope is not a mindset, it's a feeling. And you will feel that hope if you do something about it.
Excellent. Very positive contribution there, Solly. Thank you for that. Andrew, perhaps the last question for you. Again, reflecting on what you said, you mentioned that in business, change should be driven not just by the leaders, but by all the voices and opinions of people involved in the company. Practically, how do we manage that to get those different voices heard? And in particular, the voices of local cultures in countries, away from the headquarters. So the operating companies that have maybe different cultures and different mindsets on this as a starting point. How do we give everybody a voice?
I think that there are two things. I mean, firstly, an essential part of leadership is to listen. And any company or any organization that is not listening to the people who are part of the organization, the movement that they are working to deliver, is not going to reach its optimum level. I mean, and therefore there are multiplicity of digital tools, to enable leaders of business like Vodafone and others to really listen. And then there are many forms of programs, which organizations can bring to the table to assist those of us to really roll that out. So I think the first answer to that is that if leaders are plowing on and not listening, then I think it's a worrying place to be. Yeah, and there's a lot of digital tools to enable you to listen, and there's a lot of very experienced consultants who, if you don't know how to frame that, whether it's a company of 5 people or 500 or 100,000, you can find ways of doing that. I think the second thing, again, is a really good question. If you don't have deep respect for the countries in which you're operating, then you probably won't be operating there for very long. Deep cultural respect, deep respect for what is expected, for how to do business. Again, and it comes back to listening. Then I think at a time when a lot of countries are very very local looking, then I think you're in a very dangerous space as a company, because you need to listen to your employees, and you need to have deep respect for the countries in which you're operating and where you hope to either build digital society or serve them in whatever way you're choosing to do.
Excellent. Thank you both very much, and also thank you to Tony Juniper, who had to drop out. I think you both acknowledged, the quality of the discussion, the questions that have been raised by the audience. I think that's a reflection of the input that you gave us. It was hugely thought-provoking, hugely stimulating. So thank you both for that, and also thank you to Tony. We haven't done justice to all of the questions. There have been many more questions that have come in. We will try and get answers to you through the social media channels. But for now, my job is simply to thank you both once again, to thank the audience for their contribution, and hand over to Nicole, who's going to take us through to the next section. Nicole.
Thank you, Andrew, and all of our panelists for that fascinating discussion. One of the things that came through very clearly was that true sustainability, true purpose, must be embedded into every aspect of a business. And of course, that is what our first award today is all about. It's time now to announce the winner of the Doing Business Differently Film Award. This award recognizes a short film about business changing their business model to become more sustainable. The judges, which included sustainability professionals and filmmakers, considered both the effectiveness of the storytelling as well as the credibility of the ideas presented. The winner will be presented by the filmmaker Pradeep Krishan. Pradeep is a filmmaker who taught himself botany and became an ecological gardener who restores degraded habitats with native plants, mostly in the desert regions of Western India. He's written several books about trees, including The Trees of Delhi, a field guide, and he is a director of documentary and feature films. Some of his feature films include Masay Sahib, in which Annie gives it to those ones, and Electric Moon.
Hello. My name is Pradeep Krishan, and I'm standing in a patch of 8.5 square kilometers of dry forest in the middle of the city of New Delhi, which some of you will have heard of as being the most polluted capital city of anywhere in the world. This is not something we're proud of, but it's something that reminds us of how important it is to think of sustainability issues and to think of the ecology and the environment in ways that are going to help to improve it for the people who live there. I myself have spent the last 18 or 19 years, rewilding, trying to restore degraded ecologies, mostly in the desert. And that's what brings me back again and again to this forest, which I hope one day will become a much more natural, biodiverse forest than it is today. But that's not why I'm here. The reason I'm here today is to very proudly present the winner of one category of TVE's Global Sustainability Film Awards. The category is called Doing Business Differently, and the name of the film that is the winner is Helping People Put the Planet First. So can I offer my congratulations to Catherine Stokes as the winner of this film. I hope this is only the first of many films, Catherine, that you will make that puts the environment first and helps to make business become much more environment friendly in all the different ways in which it operates in the world. Thank you so much.
It's really important to me to make greener choices because we should try to hand the planet we received down to the next generation in as good, if not a better state than when we received it. My name is Sarah Ryan Hudson. I live in Manhattan. I just finished law school, and hopefully by the time this comes out, I will be admitted to the bar as a practicing attorney. I don't necessarily say that I live a zero waste life or I'm eco-friendly 100% of the time. I just try to choose a green alternative whenever it's available.
Day by day, we continue to see reports of how plastic waste is just accumulating in our planet, so it's important to act fast. At P&G Beauty, we're experimenting with refillable beauty products, and we're trying to change consumer habits to get them comfortable with using a refillable product.
In many cases, consumers are buying things, using them to completion, and then they put those packages directly into their recycling bin or the garbage. So to get them to refill, we need to make that intuitive. We need to make sure that that thing can stay clean after multiple uses, and the consumer really needs to be able to access it. They can see their overall objective and aspiration in that product right from the start.
And so we piloted an Olay refillable product where consumers buy the jar and the refill pod, and after they use the jar of cream, they put the refill pod right back into the jar and they have a whole new fresh pot of cream. That saves 95% plastic than our typical Regenerist jar, so that's a meaningful impact.
It's definitely not easy to find sustainable beauty products. You can't just go to the grocery store on the way home if you're trying to be zero waste.
P&G was the first company to sign on to TerraCycle's Loop program, which is really experimenting and pioneering in refillable products.
Thank you, Pradeep, and congratulations to the team at BBC Storyworks for that intriguing glimpse into a potential future without waste. We sent the team at BBC Storyworks word that they had won. This is their response.
Sustainability is at our core, and how passionate we are about that particular issue, and for a long while now, we've wanted that to manifest itself in our storytelling and filmmaking. Well, the incredible news is we have just won an award. It's the P&G film, and it's the GSFA Awards, the Global Sustainability Film Awards, the one that we wanted. If you recall, the one we talked about a couple of times in the last few weeks. We've won. So congratulations.
Congratulations, everybody.
I think that was proof there are ways to celebrate, even if we can't all be together. Congratulations. For the final award of the day, we have a nominated category for films about AI, artificial intelligence, that show the technology behind the solutions. I'd like now to introduce Grace Bian, the sponsor of this award. Grace is an entrepreneur, inventor, and the chairwoman of BMS corporate member of Global Healthcare. She focuses on the potential of smart cities to transform society through projects like mobile hospitals and smart health villages.
My name is Grace Bian. I'm the chairman of Global Healthcare. Global Healthcare is a world-leading health providers. We build healthcare and wellness resorts around different countries. We're focusing on life sciences. We believe to using the most natural way to increase the human immunity for longevity. Now we're about to announce the winners. Although maybe throughout the film are not necessary to see inside all the evidence from AI and global digital future, but however, to be allowed for this group to bring in a very innovation solution, they've been through a very large of the machine learning and data collection process. Now, the winner of 2020 TVE GSFA AI Award is Coronavirus Pandemic Making Safer Emergency Hospital by Sinotech. Congratulations.
This alternative version, reversing airflows, are proposed for a typical marriage hall in more humid, warm coastal climates and is potentially entirely naturally ventilated, drawing air into the ward at low level behind each bedhead through a simple non-return flap, and, as it warms, rising to be exhausted using a natural stack effect generated by a central stack, a chimney in effect, puncturing the roof above the center of each ward. Entry into each ward is directly from the outside, and the corridor spaces around the wards are all clean and strictly isolated by airlock lobbies. In this scheme, air is mechanically exhausted around the perimeter at bedhead height and has a potentially passive downdraft supply of evaporatively cooled air droplets into each ward from a wind catcher at roof level through a cool tube of micronized sprays. As the mist evaporates, it cools the air dramatically, down by 14 degrees Celsius. It works very well in hot and dry atmospheres, as the laboratories of Torrent Pharmaceuticals in Ahmedabad, for example. There is a concern about water droplets surviving into the occupied zone, and so the water and the equipment must be kept extremely clean. The team can develop viable low-energy ventilation models for converted spaces in many other climate regions, from temperate northwest to the Mediterranean, from continental climates in China and central India to the Midwest of North America, Canada, and marine coastal climates globally. The research demonstrates that intelligent low-tech design can significantly reduce the cross-patient transfer of the virus in airborne droplets and aerosols, and particularly decrease the exposure of nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers to pathogens, which is a major occupational health and safety concern.
Thank you, Grace, and congratulations to the director, Monica Koech, for her very timely and informative film. And now, a few words from the filmmaker.
Hello, my name is Monica Koech. I'm the director and producer of the research documentary Coronavirus Pandemic, Making Safer Emergency Hospitals. I am delighted and honored to have won the prestigious and important TVE Global Sustainability Film Award in the category AI. A big thank you to the judges and everybody involved. The idea for the film arose from an urgent problem that we are all currently facing, but in particular ODA countries such as India and Brazil. I mean here, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic and the great uncertainty around the uncontrolled airborne dispersal of the droplets containing the virus, for instance, in hospital wards. I was fortunate in the sense that I had been approached by a team of world-class researchers from the University of Cambridge, led by Professor Andrew Woods and Professor Alan Short. And I am, of course, very pleased that our film has been recognized for its positive impact and for raising an awareness for this critical issue, such as with the World Health Organization. I hope it does not show too much in the final product, but to be honest, because of the urgency of the situation, we had to produce this film under tremendous time pressure and difficult production circumstances during the first lockdown. I would like to extend my gratitude to the funders for the film, the BP Institute, University of Cambridge and the University of Liverpool. And I need, of course, to thank all the people that contributed to the making of this film. Thank you, Professor Alan Short and Professor Andrew Woods. Thank you, Piotr Olszewski, for the marvelous CGI. Thank you, Roger Woods, for your amazing voiceover, and thank you, Professor Richard Kirk of Carver, for being my executive producer for this film. TVE, I am absolutely thrilled. Thank you so much for this honor.
That's the final film award for today. Thank you to our distinguished panelists, to the many filmmakers who submitted films, and to the teams at TVE and Difficult Dialogues who've worked tirelessly over the past weeks and months to make these awards happen. Before we go, we'd like to leave you with some thoughts from another one of our enthusiastic young ambassadors, Paula Soleno, an environmental worker from Guatemala.
Hola, soy Ana Paula, activista guatemalteca por los animales y el medio ambiente. Pertenezco a un grupo de jóvenes ciudadanos comprometidos con la reforestación de áreas dañadas por la tala de árboles, incendios forestales y malas prácticas agrícolas. La organización se llama Plantemos y tiene grupos en cada departamento del país para llegar a plantar 1000 árboles por mes en cada departamento. Existe un grupo de jóvenes entusiastas que se reúne mes a mes a reforestar cerros aquí en nuestro municipio, Cobán, Alta Verapaz. Ellos se llaman Nueva Generación. Ambos grupos con el mismo enfoque trabajan para la conservación del área boscosa de Guatemala y recuperar nuestros recursos naturales, llegando a la conclusión de que la conservación es nuestro propósito de vida. Se plantan árboles nativos y pertenecientes a la región específica del país, siendo 215.000 árboles plantados en más de 11 jornadas de plantación, han logrado absorber más de 70.000 toneladas de dióxido de carbono, siendo este el causante de mayor impacto en la crisis climática que nuestro planeta está enfrentando. Queremos conectar con más voluntarios, organizaciones y empresas que nos apoyen y lograr un cambio más profundo con mayores resultados. Plantemos es una organización incluyente donde cualquiera con buena intención puede participar. Todos somos parte de un mismo planeta.
Join us tomorrow at 2:30 GMT, when we'll be exploring new ideas that can help us build a more sustainable future. We'll be announcing the winners of 2 award categories for innovations and health and the environment, and we'll be joined by a distinguished panel working on the cutting edge of sustainable innovation. Goodbye for now.